You need sleep to replenish testosterone eventually. But the real question is, are you enjoying what you're doing?
Dr. Huberman's enlightening revelation reminds us that our body's natural chemistry is a very delicate balance, wherein dopamine and testosterone levels are closely intertwined. This video offers invaluable insight into understanding the true value of maintaining that harmony.
If you're viewing bright light in the middle of the night, you are suppressing dopamine release. If you're suppressing dopamine release, you are suppressing testosterone levels. Most people don't really understand how powerful this relationship is between light, dopamine, hormones, and all the great things that the sex steroid hormones do when they're available in your body in the proper ratios. There's a fascinating relationship between the hormone system and the nervous system. And hormones work in general on slower timescales. The definition of a hormone is something is a chemical released at one location in the body, goes and acts at multiple locations far away and within the body. Neurochemicals like dopamine and serotonin tend to work a little more quickly. There are hormones like adrenaline and cortisol that can work very fast, but here I'm referring mainly to testosterone in humans and in animals. There's a very interesting relationship between testosterone and dopamine that speaks directly to what we're talking about now. So dopamine and testosterone are closely related in the pituitary system. And obviously testosterone comes from the adrenals and from the testes. But the major effect of testosterone is to make effort feel good. That's what testosterone does. It has other effects too, right? Reproductive effects, androgenizing parts of the body, etc. But it makes effort feel good. The testosterone molecule is synthesized from cholesterol. Cholesterol can either be made into cortisol, a stress hormone, or testosterone, but not both. So you have a limited amount of cholesterol, and it gets diverted towards stress or towards this pathway where effort feels good. That's the pathway you want to get into. The anger pathway, if we were to just kind of play a mind experiment here, the anger eventually is going to divert more of that cholesterol molecule to cortisol and stress, and you will be slowly depleting testosterone. Now, going into this, you'll have plenty of testosterone, but after a couple days, there have been very interesting studies showing that testosterone doesn't necessarily drop with sleep deprivation. That's a bit of a myth. The takeaway from all of this is if you can just convince yourself, or ideally, if you can just enjoy yourself, you are going to maintain or maybe even increase testosterone stores, which will make effort feel good. And to me, aside from neuroplasticity, where everything becomes automatic after this experience, to me, that's the holy grail. When effort feels good, life just gets way better. And we're not talking about achieving the reward. I'm not talking about the end of this thing. I'm talking about the process of it feeling really good.
Dr. Huberman's wisdom guides us to a path where effort becomes an exhilarating experience, unlocking your true potential. Imagine the boundless possibilities, the unyielding progress, and the unstoppable beast within that awaits realization. Through understanding and embracing the importance of effort, we can transform ourselves into the ultimate version of who we're meant to be.
Hormones are powerful. The relationship between thoughts and hormones and these physiological things is enormous. I had a colleague that a few years ago, he was dying of pancreatic cancer, and I was interviewing him just because he's an important figure in our community and I was a friend. And there was one day where he told me, he said, I don't want to make it past the new year. And it was crushing for me to hear. And I knew that he had been on some androgen therapy for a whole set of other things. And I said, have you taken your androgen cream? And he was like, no, I haven't done it. Go get it for me. I have this on film. He takes it, he puts the androgen cream on. 10 minutes later, he says, you know what? I think I want to live into the new year. And I'm going to write 12 letters of recommendation. And he did. And so there's something about these molecules that in an ancient way, in all organisms, all mammals as far as we know, are linked to the will to live. They're linked to effort and making effort feel good, which has been fundamental to the evolution of our species. I always say, people think that the opposite of testosterone is estrogen, but it's not. The opposite of testosterone is prolactin, which makes us feel quiescent and not in pursuit of things, etc. Testosterone makes effort feel good. Estrogen makes emotions feel okay.
Dr. Huberman emphasizes the significance of achieving a harmonious balance between estrogen and testosterone for our emotional well-being. This equilibrium paves the way for a stronger, more resilient emotional foundation, allowing us to navigate life's challenges with grace and fortitude.
So just as there are behaviors that can increase testosterone, there are behaviors that can decrease testosterone. And one of the most well-characterized ones in humans is becoming a parent. Expecting fathers have an almost 50% decrease in testosterone levels, both free and bound testosterone. As well, their cortisol levels, a stress hormone, drop by almost threefold, which is incredible. And their estradiol levels double. So their estrogen levels double. So expecting fathers, many people have known, put on additional body weight. Everyone always thought that it's because they're eating in parallel with their pregnant wife. But it turns out that these effects of reduced testosterone, increased estradiol, and reduced cortisol can all be explained by an increase in prolactin. So not just in humans, but in other species as well, when the male and female of that species are expecting young, they lay down more body fat. The assumption is that this is to prepare for long nights of no sleep, which occurs in many species, not just in humans. So it's really interesting that this hormone prolactin can start suppressing whole categories of hormones, sex steroid hormones, and can start increasing whole categories of other ones. So we hear about the dad bod. There are a lot of explanations for the dad bod, but it is a well-known phenomenon that testosterone is going to drop, prolactin is going to increase, estradiol is going to increase in males and females that are expecting children. The other behavior that markedly reduces testosterone in both males and females and markedly reduces the desire for seeking sex and sex itself is illness. And many of you might say, well, duh, when people feel sick, they don't feel like seeking out mates, they don't feel like having sex. But have you ever wondered why that actually is? Well, it turns out that it can be explained by the release of what are called inflammatory cytokines. So cytokines are related to the immune system, they travel in the lymph and in the blood, and they attack invader cells like bacteria and viruses. And under conditions of illness, we make a lot of different cytokines. Some of them are anti-inflammatory, but some of them are pro-inflammatory. And the best known example of a pro-inflammatory cytokine is IL-6. And it's known that IL-6, when injected into individuals, will decrease the desire for sex and eventually will reduce levels of testosterone and estrogen, independent of feeling lousy. So the reason why people don't want sex when they're sick is because levels of IL-6 are increased. Now, this is important because as we start to think about the different ways to modulate the sex steroid hormones, so-called optimize the hormones, in short and put simply, inflammatory cytokines like IL-6 are bad for sex steroid hormones. We all know, because now we've been told a lot in the last decade or so, that getting proper sleep is important for all these aspects of health. Getting proper sleep can really offset all the reductions in testosterone and estrogen and reductions in fertility that occur if we don't get enough sleep. But seldom is it discussed how sleep actually adjusts things like testosterone and estrogen. And it does it by modifying cortisol. So the molecule cholesterol can be converted into testosterone or estrogen, but there's a competition whereby the cholesterol will turn into cortisol and not testosterone, or it'll turn into cortisol and not estrogen if stress levels are too high. So the simple version of this is getting your breathing right during the waking hours, meaning primarily, unless you're working out really hard or there's some other reason why you're maybe eating or speaking, you need to be breathing through your mouth, you should be a nose breather. There's really good evidence for that now. And in sleep, you also want to be a nose breather because that's going to increase the amount of oxygen that you're bringing into your system and the amount of carbon dioxide that you're offloading. There are other positive effects of it as well, but you're basically reducing apnea. Breath holding in sleep leads to buildup of carbon dioxide and leads to increases in cortisol, which then decrease testosterone and decrease estrogen in negative ways across all sexes. Okay, so the simple version of this is get your breathing right. So how do you do that? How do you get your breathing right? Well, for some people that have severe sleep apnea, they're going to need the CPAP machine. This is a machine that you actually put on your face and it helps you breathe properly in sleep. In the daytime, the best way to get good at nasal breathing is to dilate the nasal passages because a lot of people have a hard time breathing through their nose. And one way to do this is to just breathe through your nose more. And one way to do that is that when you exercise, in particular cardiovascular exercise, most of the time, provided you're not in maximum effort, you should be nasal breathing. Becoming a nasal breather can have all sorts of positive effects by reducing cortisol, reducing apnea, and indirectly raising testosterone and estrogen in the proper ratios. So this might seem kind of foundational and indirect, but when you go into the scientific literature, it comes through as one of the most powerful things that you can do that is zero cost. It takes a little effort, but it's zero cost, and it has all these positive effects across the board, both cosmetic and in sleep and hormonal, etc. Viewing bright light within the first hour of waking, whether or not it's from artificial light or ideally from sunlight, has these powerful effects on sleep and wakefulness. But we have to return to this if you want to understand how light can impact hormones, because hormones, light and dopamine, have a very close-knit relationship, so much so that your light viewing behavior can actually have a direct effect on hormone levels and fertility. It can have a direct effect on hormone levels and libido. It can have a direct effect on hormone levels and your ability to heal quickly. Several species of animals, many species of animals, in fact, like rabbits and fox and various mustelids like ferrets and ermines, change their pelage color across the seasons. So dopamine has a precursor. That precursor is tyrosine, which is an amino acid, comes from food. But the precursor to a lot of the melanin-producing elements of cells that give pigmentation, including for the hair, is tyrosine and tyrosinase, an enzyme. So yes, the same amino acid-based pathway and many of the same enzymes that are devoted to dopamine and dopamine increasing the sex steroid hormones are devoted to giving pigmentation to the hair and skin. And this is why in the summer months, when days are longer, animals are breeding more. And this is also why in the winter months, when days are shorter, animals are breeding less. This is also why in humans, many people, not all, feel an elevation in mood in the spring and summer months because of the amount of sunlight they're getting is increased relative to the winter months. Increased viewing of sunlight, and it has to be to the eyes, it's not to the skin. Increased viewing of sunlight increases dopamine levels in the brain. Increased dopamine levels in animals and humans increases the amount of these melanocytes and the activity of these melanin-producing cells, which give pigmentation to the skin and hair, and indirectly increase the amount of testosterone and estrogen, and thereby reproductive behavior, feelings of well-being, social interactions, reductions in anxiety, etc. All of which should make sense based on what we've talked about already in terms of the biology and the impact of these steroid hormones on various aspects of the mind and body. This translates to the protocol of, if you want to optimize testosterone and estrogen, you need to get your light viewing behavior correct. It's not just about optimizing your sleep, which is also important. It's about getting sufficient amount of light in your eyes so you have sufficient levels of dopamine. It means getting anywhere from 2 to 10 minutes of bright light exposure in your eyes early in the day. It is not sufficient to do this with sunglasses unless you have to do that for safety reasons. It's fine to wear prescription lenses and contacts. If you can't get sunlight for whatever reason, you want to use bright artificial light. But that is absolutely critical for timing the cortisol release properly, limiting cortisol release to the early part of the day, getting increases in dopamine that are going to promote the production of testosterone and estrogen to healthy levels. The other aspect of light viewing behavior that's extremely important is to avoid bright light exposure to your eyes in the middle of the night. If you're viewing bright light in the middle of the night, you are suppressing dopamine release. If you're suppressing dopamine release, you are suppressing testosterone levels. Errors and making mistakes is key. At a neurobiological level, plasticity is faster when you make errors.
Dr. Huberman's insight challenges conventional thinking. Making mistakes and missing the mark can actually increase our flexibility and prepare us to tackle life's toughest challenges. Don't be discouraged by setbacks, my man. Embrace them as opportunities to learn and grow. By cultivating a flexible mindset, you can navigate any obstacle and emerge stronger, wiser, and more resilient than ever before. and that's just the beginning.
The reorganization of the brain happens in deep rest, sleep, and things like it. And so this is why sometimes people will work very, very hard at trying to make a change, and it's just not happening, it's not happening, it's not happening. And then they'll take a little bit of a break, or a week later they come back and they nail it.
His message is clear. Failure is not the end, but a vital step in our journey towards success. We can unlock our full potential and achieve greatness by embracing failure and learning from our mistakes. This process may be slow and challenging, but it is worth it. In this video, you'll discover the key to overcoming failure and reaching new heights of achievement.
Neuroplasticity is this incredible feature of the brain's ability to change in response to experience. We should probably broaden that definition to say the nervous system, because the brain is obviously amazing, but that's just the part of the nervous system that's housed in the skull. You've also got all these connections with the organs of the body that control breathing and heart rate. Those can change too. Right. When you hear about things like muscle memory, actually muscle has no memory. It's the nerve connections that change when you learn something and you relearn it.
The famous neuroscientist words remind us that there's a true learning that lies in our nervous system, not just our muscles. While muscle memory is often discussed, it's the connections in our brain that truly allow us to learn and grow. By harnessing the power of our nervous system, we can achieve incredible feats and overcome even the most daunting of challenges. So don't just focus on building muscle, train your brain to learn and adapt. You will be absolutely amazed at what you can accomplish.
Most things in the body are bidirectional. So like the heart is communicating to the brain how fast it's beating. The brain is also controlling heart rate. The lungs are communicating with the brain are communicating with the lungs. So the reason I am hesitant to say it's all one direction is that typically when one looks a little bit more closely, you see that it's a two-way conversation. So anytime we talk about neuroplasticity, we're talking about the nervous system changing in some way to make the nervous system function better or worse. So a head injury will give you neuroplasticity, but it's called maladaptive plasticity. It doesn't make you better. So typically when we talk about plasticity, we're talking about adaptive plasticity, some change in the nervous system that allows you to be better, think better, perform better, any of that. That means something changed.
Adaptive plasticity means that your brain can change and it can learn new things, even when you grow up. It's like having a superpower that helps you be smart, creative, and good at things you practice. Just like how your muscles get stronger when you exercise, your brain gets smarter when you learn. And today, you're going to learn exactly how to achieve that.
It's a pretty well accepted principle of neuroscience that the nervous system changes very easily from the time we're born until about age 25. It's not like on your 25th birthday, you get the gift of no more plasticity. It tapers off. And for some people it'll be 27 and some people will be 24. But from birth until 25, the entire nervous system, because of the chemicals that are circulating, because of a number of things, it just wants to change. And so it changes through just passive experience. So a child goes to their first movie or watches their first movie, and it changes the way they view the world forever. And you can unlearn things, that's also neuroplasticity, but all you need to do as a young person is be exposed to something and it will change your brain. Provided it's novel, or it's interesting enough, or it makes you alert enough, you'll change. Now, after age 25, you can still get neuroplasticity, but the mechanisms completely change. The chemicals that are involved completely change. The ways to get neuroplasticity shift, and there are a couple requirements. The first one is that it has to be self-directed. We love the idea that we tell people to change and they're going to change, but the only change that comes after age 25 is self-directed change. You can shape a child for better or for worse. You can literally shape their brain and their nervous system. I mean, I would just watch the Tiger Woods documentary. He was shaped as a child to become the best golfer, and he obviously contributed to that. But you can't take an adult and make them the best golfer in the world unless they want to be the best golfer in the world. When you're born until about age 25, the connections between neurons, we call those synapses. And it's a little bit of a tricky name because we talk about as connections, but they're actually spaces between the neurons. They're like these little gaps, and the neurons spit chemicals back and forth across those gaps. Those synapses are the communication points between neurons. And anytime you learn something or unlearn something, anytime you acquire new language or motor skill, the arrangement of those connections changes. It's like new roads through a city kind of thing. So when you turn roughly 25, there's a significant change in the amount of space between neurons, and they literally don't have as much space to move around. It's called extracellular space, and it's not like cement gets poured in there.
Right.
But there are a bunch of things fill in that space, and it literally makes it harder to move things around. So the brain early on it has some things that can't change, like the areas that control heart rate or breathing. You don't want those to change because you want your heart rate functioning in the background all the time. But it's a little bit more like a Lego set. You can move things around a particular foundation. Now, after age 25, it's more like you've got the model glued together, and you can, steam away some glue and move things around, but it takes work.
Right.
And the work consists of focus. It requires intense focus. So a child, you can just put them in front of an experience or put them in an experience and it'll shape their brain. But as an older person, meaning 25 or older, you have to really concentrate on what it is exactly you're trying to change. So there's less space for things to move around. You need focus. And there's also this interesting thing that you need focus, and then you also need deep rest afterwards, because that's actually when the changes occur, the resculpting of the brain. And the focus is key, because the focus on what you're trying to learn causes the release of particular chemicals. And those chemicals send a signal to the brain, something needs to change. And if you think about it, there's no reason for your nervous system to change at all. Why should it? And these chemicals that make us feel alert or surprised or anxious or afraid or very, very excited, those aren't just for our emotional experience. Those mark time in the brain and say, wait, something's different now than it was a few minutes before this happened. And now there's this opportunity to learn. And then the brain starts looking around for, well, what should I learn? And we could talk about what the steps are for changing, but it's really a chemical and an actual physical difference in the brain between 0 to 25 and after 25 that underlies this shift in what we call passive plasticity early in life. You just passively go through life, and for better or for worse, by 25, your brain is going to be the way it is. And then you can still change it, but you have to dig in and put some effort. If something really bad happens, you get what's called one trial learning. You will never forget that happened. And for some people, they think, oh my goodness, I've had these traumas. How will I ever forget? You can unlearn the emotional relationship to it, but you will never forget. It's kind of remarkable. It's kind of the stinger of biology, because you wish that you could have that for other things that were more pleasant. But not only would you not forget, but you would remember all the things that led up to it, even though you weren't thinking about those as it happened. So that morning, you putting on your shoes in a particular way, the trajectory you took, suddenly would be called up to memory and packaged into this experience. And so this is, it gets to a lot of things related to trauma, where people will, or PTSD, people will start to have all the physical symptoms of a trauma that have nothing to do with the actual traumatic experience. And we always hear that kind of cliche example of, a car backfires and then the veteran who's come back thinks that they're in a battle. It's actually, that can happen, but more typically it's they get up in the morning, they're making up a cup of coffee, and bam, all of a sudden the emotions hit, the physical symptoms hit. And it probably relates to the fact that things that happened, actual traumas that happen, capture elements in time before, during, and afterward. And so the nervous system wants safety. Fundamentally, it's like Maslow's hierarchy of needs starts in the nervous system. Everything's anchored first in the nervous system. And so you would capture that entire sequence of events. The highlighting of negative events, I should say, is triggered by the release of epinephrine, which is adrenaline. So adrenaline comes from the kidneys in our body. That makes us breathe faster, makes us pupils dilate, all the physical symptoms of stress and anxiety. In the brain, we call that exact same molecule epinephrine, just to confuse people. I didn't name them, but we'll call it epinephrine or adrenaline interchangeably. So that causes alertness, and it has no bias towards positive events or negative events. So if you see somebody that you really enjoy seeing and you didn't expect to see them, epinephrine will be released into your body. As well, acetylcholine is released, and acetylcholine acts like a spotlight. So as I mentioned, when we're excited by something and we're stressed, our pupils dilate, which actually causes us to go into a bit of a tunnel vision. We don't always experience it as dark around the edges kind of tunnel, but we don't see the big picture, literally. It changes the optics of our eyes. We get much better at seeing individual things. If you've ever been in love, you've experienced this, because the person just seems to occupy your entire visual field and your entire emotional field, as it were. So there's this kind of soda straw view of the world. Not always bad. It can be good, as in falling in love or being excited about something. And acetylcholine is a molecule that's released in the brain that is marking or highlighting the specific areas of the brain that are active during a particular event. So one way to think about this is if you decided that it were important to you to, say, learn a particular language or to learn all there is to know about something that's very vital to your life for some reason, the information would literally be highlighted as you read it in your brain, and that would make it easier to learn. But the actual learning doesn't take place while you have that acetylcholine swimming around in your brain and highlighting things, or the epinephrine, the adrenaline. It happens later when you go to sleep. The reorganization of the brain happens in deep rest, sleep and things like it. And so this is why sometimes people will work very, very hard at trying to make a change, and it's just not happening, it's not happening, it's not happening. And then they'll take a little bit of a break, or a week later they come back and they nail it. That is because the changes don't actually occur during the attempt to learn. Errors and making mistakes is key. And that's not just as a, thematically like, oh, errors are good, you learn from errors. What is the Michael Jordan thing? I missed whatever 10,000 of the shots I didn't take. I can never remember the quote. Anyway, making errors is good, but at a neurobiological level, plasticity is faster when you make errors. And here's why. When you do everything properly, you get up from your chair, you go get a glass of water, you speak the languages you speak, why should your brain change? It has the complete operating manual for what you need to do. When you make a mistake, it feels terrible because you release epinephrine, and most people will tilt away from the experience at that point. They want to walk away. But if you can focus on what just happened and what you're trying to do, you bring acetylcholine to the learning experience. And when you make errors, there's something called top-down processing. It means that the higher order areas of your brain send signals deep into the brain. Whatever you're about to do next is really important. And so it's probably best thought of as throwing darts at a dartboard, because it's just so straightforward to use as an example. So if I throw a dart, misses the dartboard entirely, and I throw it, okay, so then I'm off from the bullseye, I'm off from the bullseye, and I'm getting frustrated. It's like, and I want to walk away from it. But if I keep doing that, what's happening is my brain is queuing up all sorts of things without me realizing it, like what trajectory my arm is taking when it goes left, what trajectory my arm is taking when it goes right, why suddenly I think I'm doing everything right and it hits the wall again. And if I were to go away from that for a short while, or maybe continue to just throw errors, I'm learning faster than if I get closer on the first try. So the brain takes error signals and says, okay, we need to correct this, and that's plasticity. So to make it really concrete, making errors isn't just good because we tell people it's good and you have to try, you have to fail in order to learn. It's actually the best portal into learning. Your brain will not change, your nervous system will not change unless you're making errors. And this is actually what kids do really well. The kid learning to walk is falling down all the time. And the brain is updating, okay, what was different? And a lot of it's subconscious. The kid isn't thinking, oh, I have to bend my left knee a little bit more. I need to, flex a stabilizer muscle in my tibialis. They don't think like that. The nervous system is very smart and it just figures it out. So focus, errors, and rest.